is a moment, sitting in that hospital bed with 3 cracked ribs and a knee swollen to the size of a grapefruit, when I realized my son hadn't called. Not once. Not to ask if I was breathing. Not to ask if they'd set the bone right. Not even a text. 41 years I spent as a structural engineer. I built bridges. Real ones. The kind that hold 18-wheelers at 70 miles an hour. I know what load bearing looks like, and I know what it looks like when something is about to give. I just never thought I'd see it in my own family. My name is Howard. I'm 64 years old. I live alone in the house I built with my own hands, outside of Tucson, Arizona, on a half-acre lot with a mesquite tree in the front yard that my late wife Elaine planted the spring we moved in. She died 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless. After that, it was just me and my son Kyle, and I thought, I genuinely believed that losing her had made us closer. I was wrong about that too. The accident happened on a Tuesday morning in February. I was coming back from the hardware store, 2 bags of mortar mix in the truck bed. A kid in a lifted pickup ran a red light on Tanque Verde and hit my driver's side door at about 40 miles an hour. The paramedics said I was lucky. Cracked ribs, torn meniscus, a gash above my left eye that took 11 stitches. Lucky. I've been thinking about that word ever since. The ER was loud and cold and smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. They got me into a room around noon. By 2 o'clock, they confirmed the fractures, scheduled me for an MRI on the knee, and told me I'd be staying at least 2 nights, maybe 3. A nurse named Sylvia, small woman, silver hair, the kind of calm that only comes from 30 years of watching people at their worst, helped me get my phone out of my jacket and asked if there was anyone she should call. I called Kyle myself. He answered on the 4th ring. I could hear a television in the background. Dad, what's up? I told him what happened. The accident, the ribs, the knee, the hospital. There was a pause. That's on Tanque Verde. I hate that intersection. I waited for him to say he was coming. He didn't. Are they keeping you overnight? At least 2 nights, maybe 3. Another pause. I've got a thing with Amber's parents Saturday. I'll try to swing by before then. Amber was his girlfriend. They'd been together 2 years. She was 31, worked in real estate, and had a way of looking at my house the way a developer looks at an empty lot. Sure, I said. No rush. I hung up and stared at the ceiling tiles. 11 stitches above my eye, 3 cracked ribs, and my son had a thing with his girlfriend's parents Saturday. It was Tuesday. He came by Thursday afternoon, not Saturday, Thursday, which I suppose I should be grateful for, but by then the bar had dropped so low that showing up at all felt like a favor. He was there for maybe 25 minutes. He stood by the window the whole time, hands in his pockets, glancing at his phone every few minutes. He asked how I was feeling. I said sore. He nodded like I'd confirmed something he already knew. Then he said, I talked to Amber. She thinks this might be a good time to think about downsizing. You know, the house is a lot for one person. I looked at him for a long moment. I built that house. I know, Dad. I'm just saying, if you ever needed to move somewhere more manageable, I designed the load calculations myself. He let it go. We talked about nothing for another 10 minutes and then he left. Said he had to get back for a work call. It was 4:30 on a Thursday afternoon. That night I couldn't sleep. My ribs ached every time I turned over, and my mind kept snagging on that word. Manageable. The house was a lot for one person. I'd heard Amber say almost the exact same thing 6 months earlier at Thanksgiving. Word for word. I'm not a suspicious man by nature. I spent 4 decades in engineering because I like things I can measure and verify. Load tolerances, compression ratios, stress fractures. But lying in that hospital bed, I started doing math in my head. Kyle was 36. He worked in sales for a solar panel company, made decent money, or said he did. He and Amber had been renting an apartment in Scottsdale for almost 2 years. He'd borrowed money from me 3 times since Elaine died. The first time was $14,000 for a truck. The second time was $9,000 for what he called a short-term cash flow problem. The third time was $22,000, just until Q2 picks up. Dad, I'll pay you back by June. That was 16 months ago. June had come and gone twice. $45,000. And now Amber was talking about the house being a lot to manage. I picked up my phone. It was just past midnight. I called an old friend, a man named Roy Whitfield, who I'd worked with on a county infrastructure project back in 2009. Roy had gone into private investigation after his engineering firm folded in 2012, and he was very good at it. Discreet. Thorough. Didn't ask unnecessary questions. Howard? His voice was alert. Roy was always alert. Raving all right. Not entirely, I said. I need someone to look into some things. My son. His girlfriend. Finances. Plans. Anything recent. Can you do that? A beat of silence. When do you need it? I'm in the hospital for another couple days. So, soon. I'll start in the morning. After I hung up, I lay back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling for a long time. Outside, Tucson was quiet. I thought about Elaine and how she used to say Kyle had her eyes and my stubbornness. She'd meant it as a compliment. The next morning, a man named Douglas Hale came to see me. I'd called Doug 2 days earlier from the ER, before the morphine made everything fuzzy. Doug was my attorney, had been for 15 years. Handled my estate planning after Elaine died, wrote the trust, updated the will, knew my finances the way a mechanic knows an engine. When I told him what Kyle had said about the house, there was a long pause on his line. I think we should talk, he said. I can come to you. He arrived at 10 in the morning with a legal pad and 2 coffees from the cart downstairs. He was 68, tall and angular, with reading glasses that were always slightly crooked. He sat in the chair by my bed and listened while I talked. When I finished, he set down his coffee. What do you want to do? I want to make sure that whatever I've built goes where I decide it goes, and I want to know how airtight the current documents are. They're solid, he said, but we can make them bulletproof. Living trust, updated beneficiaries, pour-over will. We can structure it so there's no viable challenge. Do it. He nodded and started writing. We worked through the details for nearly 2 hours. By the time he left, I had a clear picture of what the new structure would look like. The house, the retirement accounts, the investment portfolio. All of it redirected. Not to Kyle. To the Tucson Habitat for Humanity chapter, where I'd volunteered with Elaine every spring for 12 years, and to a scholarship fund at the University of Arizona's Engineering College. I wanted my legacy to build things, not to pay off someone else's debt. They'd promised to have the first draft back to me within 48 hours. That afternoon, Roy called. I've got some preliminary numbers, he said, his voice careful. You should probably hear this sitting down. I'm lying in a hospital bed. Close enough. Kyle and Amber had combined credit card debt of around $58,000. Their lease on the Scottsdale apartment was up in 3 months, and based on email exchanges Roy had access to legal means I won't elaborate on, they were not planning to renew. Kyle had made 3 separate calls in the past month to a real estate agent, a woman named Christine Draper, who specialized in estate liquidations and probate sales. I let that sit there for a second. Probate sales. He called a probate specialist, I said. 3 times, Roy said. Most recent call was 9 days before your accident. 9 days before my accident. While I was healthy and living in my house and planting my vegetable garden for spring, my son was calling a probate specialist to discuss the value and marketability of my property. There's more, Roy said. Amber has been in contact with a financial advisor about asset consolidation. The notes in one email chain reference an expected property transfer event within 18 to 24 months. Property transfer event. That's what I was. An event on a timeline. I thanked Roy and told him to keep going, get me everything he could. Then I put the phone down and sat very still for a while. Sylvia came in to check my vitals. She was quiet and efficient, but she paused when she saw my face. Not good news, she said. No. She finished checking my chart and then said, without looking up, for what it's worth, I've been doing this for 31 years. The families that show up every day aren't always the ones who love you the most. Sometimes the ones who love you most are the ones who can't bring themselves to walk in. I thought about that for a long time after she left. That evening, I made one more call. A man named Curtis Beale, who I'd known since graduate school. Curtis had spent his career in commercial real estate investment, had done very well for himself, and still owed me a favor from 1998 that he'd been trying to repay ever since. I'd helped him run structural analysis on a mixed-use building that turned out to be deeply problematic. My report saved him from a catastrophic investment. He'd told me more than once that I could call that in whenever I wanted. Curtis, I said, I need to talk to you about something. An investment opportunity I'm considering. It would involve some of my liquid assets, and I need it done quietly. He was quiet for a moment. How quietly? My son can't know until it's done. Another pause. Then, tell me what you're thinking. I explained it to him. I've been watching a small commercial development project on the east side of Tucson, a mixed-use renovation of 3 historic buildings near the university. The kind of project I understood deeply and believed in. The lead developer was a woman named Sandra Okafor, whose firm I'd consulted with 2 years earlier on a structural issue. I trusted her judgment. The project needed an anchor investor for Phase 2. I had liquid assets sitting in accounts earning almost nothing. Sandra's project is solid, Curtis said. I've looked at her numbers. If you want in, I can make an introduction. Already have one. I worked with her, but I need a partner on this. Someone who can act as co-investor and provide some cover while I'm in the hospital and can't manage things directly. Cover from your son. Yes. Curtis was quiet for a moment. Howard, how bad is it? Bad enough that I called a private investigator from my hospital room at midnight. He didn't say anything else. I'll call Sandra in the morning. I was discharged on Friday. My knee was in a brace, my ribs wrapped, and I had a walker I hated. On principle, but used because I wasn't an idiot. Sylvia helped me gather my things. Kyle hadn't called since Thursday. Hadn't texted. Nothing. At the elevator, Sylvia squeezed my arm. Take care of yourself, Howard. I'll try. I handed her an envelope. If my son comes back, and he might, to deal with paperwork or pick up anything I left, give him this. She took it with both hands, looked at it, looked at me. What's in it? An address and a time, Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock. She nodded slowly. And you're sure? I've been sure since Wednesday night, I said. The drive home was 40 minutes in a car service, the Tucson winter sun flat and bright through the window. My house looked exactly the same as I'd left it. Adobe exterior, the old wooden gate Elaine had painted turquoise the summer before she got sick, the mesquite tree throwing its thin shadow across the driveway. I stood in the doorway for a moment before going in, just to look at it. I'd drawn the blueprints for this house on a drafting table in a rental apartment in 1988. I'd poured some of the foundation myself. I knew every wall and beam and junction in it by heart. It was not a property transfer event. It was my home. Inside, I made coffee, sat in my workshop, and opened my laptop. Roy's full report had arrived overnight. I read it carefully, twice. Kyle had made 2 more calls to Christine Draper after Roy's initial report. In one of them, Roy had obtained the call log through a contact. The conversation lasted 18 minutes. Draper had apparently given a market estimate. Roy had pulled up her standard estate liquidation valuation models and estimated the figure she'd likely quoted, somewhere between $640,000 and $640,000 and $680,000, depending on current comparables. Amber's emails to the financial advisor were detailed and specific. She'd referenced a 15-month timeline in one message. She'd asked about the tax implications of a sudden property acquisition following a family estate event. She'd asked about the most efficient way to pay down joint debt using lump sum proceeds. She hadn't asked about Kyle's feelings. She hadn't asked about mine. We were line items on a spreadsheet. Roy's final note was brief. Additional surveillance shows the subject and his companion visited 2 new apartment complexes in North Scottsdale last Saturday, both luxury units in the 42-hour/month range. Both tours took place the same day you were admitted to the hospital. Saturday, the day Kyle had a thing with Amber's parents. Doug Hale called that evening to say the trust documents were ready for my signature. He came by the next morning with a notary. We spent 90 minutes going through every page. When we finished and the notary had witnessed and stamped, I sat back in my workshop chair and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly. More like structural integrity. The sense that every load was properly distributed, every joint secure. Nothing was going to collapse. Sunday was quiet. I rested, read, worked a little in the shop. Kyle didn't call. Neither did Amber. I didn't expect them to. They were waiting on their own timeline, their 18 to 24 months, their property transfer event. They didn't know the event had already happened. It just hadn't happened in the direction they planned. Monday morning, Curtis called to confirm. Sandra Okafor had accepted my investment. The paperwork was signed and filed. I was now a 28% stakeholder in the East Tucson Heritage Renovation Project, with my name on the deed and in the operating agreement. Curtis was listed as co-investor and point of contact during my recovery. Everything was documented, witnessed, and as Doug had said, bulletproof. "She's pleased to have you," Curtis said. "Says your structural report in 2022 saved her about 3 months of headaches. Tell her I'm glad to be in business with someone who builds things that last." Tuesday morning, I dressed carefully. The knee brace made it difficult, and the rib sent a sharp complaint through my chest when I reached for my sport coat, but I managed. I'd asked Doug to arrange a small meeting at his office downtown. Professional, neutral ground. Just the conference room. Him, me, and whoever else arrived. Kyle arrived 7 minutes late. He looked like he hadn't slept. His hair wasn't quite right. His shirt was buttoned wrong by 1, and he had that particular look of someone who has spent a weekend constructing explanations and isn't sure any of them are going to hold. He stopped short when he saw me. I was already seated at the conference table. Walker parked against the wall, Dud beside me with a neat stack of folders. Kyle looked from me to Doug, to the folders, and something moved through his face. Not guilt exactly, more like a calculation failing in real time. "What is this?" he said. "Sit down, Kyle." He sat. On the far side of the table, his hands went to the armrests. Doug opened the first side of the table. His hands went to the armrests. Doug opened the first folder. "Kyle, your father asked me to walk you through some recent changes to his estate and financial holdings. We also need to address some other matters that came to light during the past week." Kyle's eyes moved to me. "Dad, what's going on?" I looked at him steadily. "Do you know a real estate agent named Christine Draper?" He went very still. "She specializes in probate and estate liquidation," I said. "You called her 3 times in January, most recently 9 days before my accident." I was just. He stopped. "Getting information," I said. "Yes. Amber mentioned the house being a lot to manage. You were being proactive." He didn't answer. Doug opened the second folder. "During a routine review preceding your father's investment activities, we commissioned a financial and background report on immediate family members, standard practice for estate protection purposes." He slid a copy of the summary across the table. The report details combined credit obligations of approximately $58,000, delinquent payment history on 3 separate accounts, and documented communications regarding anticipated asset acquisition, time to a, and I'm quoting here, family estate event. Kyle stared at the paper. He didn't touch it. "That language is Amber's," I said. "From an email to a financial advisor. She's been planning this for at least 15 months. The apartment tours in North Scottsdale she took you on last Saturday, the same Saturday you told me you had a thing with her parents, those were also in the report." He looked up at me then, and for just a moment I saw something genuine cross his face. Not remorse. Surprise. Not that he'd been caught, but that I'd been paying attention. "Dad," he said. I know what it looks like," I said. "I've been an engineer for 41 years. I know what a structure looks like when someone's been quietly removing the load-bearing elements. Doug laid a third folder on the table. Your father has made several significant changes over the past week. He has executed a new living trust and updated all beneficiary designations. He has formalized a demand for repayment of outstanding personal loans totaling $45,000, the first installment of which is due within 30 days. He paused. And he has made a substantial investment as a primary stakeholder in a commercial development project here in Tucson. Kyle's eyes moved between us. What kind of investment? 28% equity stake, I said. Curtis Beal is co-investor. Sandra Okafor's firm is the developer. The project is a historic renovation near the university. Good bones, good team, good return horizon. I don't... He stopped again. Started over. What does this have to do with the will? Doug answered. The updated estate documents direct all assets upon your father's passing to two beneficiaries, the Tucson Habitat for Humanity and the University of Arizona's College of Engineering Scholarship Fund. Your name does not appear in the documents. The room was very quiet. Kyle sat there looking at the folder in front of him, and I watched his face move through several things I recognized. The same sequence I'd seen in his face as a teenager when something hadn't gone the way he'd planned. The calculation, the adjustment, the search for a new angle. Then something different happened. The calculations stopped. He put his face in his hands. The silence lasted a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were red. I'm sorry, he said. It came out thin and cracked, like something under too much pressure. I know that doesn't mean anything right now, but I'm sorry. I looked at him across the table. Tell me which part you're sorry about. He flinched. All of it. Be more specific. He swallowed. I shouldn't have called Christine Draper. I was letting Amber talk me into things I knew weren't right. She made it sound like planning, like being responsible. But I knew what it was. You came to see me in the hospital for 25 minutes, I said. You stood by the window. You never asked what the doctors said. He looked down. I know. You told me the house was a lot to manage. Those were Amber's words? You were testing the idea on me. He didn't deny it. The $45,000, I said. Did you ever intend to pay it back? A long pause. I kept telling myself I would, when things stabilized, when Q2 came in. He stopped. No, I don't think I really believed I would. I sat back. My ribs ached. Outside Doug's window, downtown Tucson was going about its morning, pigeons and traffic and winter sun. I loved your mother for 31 years, I said. She was the most structurally sound person I ever knew, completely reliable under load. She would be very unhappy with both of us right now. Me, for not seeing this coming. You, for becoming someone she wouldn't recognize. Kyle looked up. His eyes were wet. He didn't say anything. I'm not changing the documents, I said. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That depends entirely on you, and it won't happen fast. But I'm also not walking out of here and pretending this conversation didn't happen. Doug was quiet, watching. You're going to start making payments on the $45,000, whatever you can manage, starting within 30 days, documented and regular. You're going to figure out what you actually want your life to look like, independent of what Amber wants. And you're going to stop talking to Christine Draper. Kyle nodded slowly. I'm not doing this because I think you've earned it, I said. I'm doing it because your mother raised you, and some part of that has to still be in there. But I won't go looking for it for you. That's your work. He nodded again, and this time something in his posture shifted, the shoulders dropping, the tight defensive set of his jaw going slack. He looked younger. He looked, for just a second, like the kid who used to hand me tools in the garage while I explained what they were for. Doug closed the folders. We spent another 40 minutes going through the formal details, the payment schedule, the legal acknowledgement of the loans, a letter of understanding that Kyle signed before he left. He shook Doug's hand at the door. Then he turned to me. "Can I come by the house this weekend?" he said. "Just to see you. Nothing else." I thought about it. Call first. He nodded and left. Doug and I sat in the quiet conference room for a moment. "That was harder than I expected," Doug said. "Easier than I feared," I said. On the drive home, I watched the city go by and thought about Elaine. She used to say that the most dangerous thing in engineering was the assumption of stability, the belief that because something had held so far, it would continue to hold. You had to keep inspecting. You had to keep asking what you might have missed. She was right about that, as she was about most things. Back at the house, I went out to the workshop. On my bench, where I'd left it 3 weeks ago before the accident, was a restoration project I'd been working on. An old drafting compass that had belonged to my father, a machinist who'd retired in 1987 and left me nothing but his tools and his work ethic. The compass was tarnished, one hinge stiff, the adjustment screw frozen with age. I'd been slowly cleaning and freeing the joints. I sat down and picked it up. The metal was cool in my hand. Patient work, Elaine used to say about restoration. You can't rush it. You just have to show up for it. I found the finest oil in the cabinet and began to work the hinge loose, slow and careful, the way I'd been taught. The workshop was warm and quiet. Outside, the mesquite tree moved slightly in the late afternoon wind. The compass was a good instrument. It had measured true for 50 years, and with the right attention, it would measure true again. Some things were worth the effort of bringing back. Some relationships too, maybe, given enough time and honesty and both people willing to do the work. I didn't know yet which kind Kyle was, but I'd left the door open. That, for now, was enough. I've been an engineer long enough to know that most failures don't happen suddenly. They happen slowly, quietly, one small compromise at a time. A hairline crack that goes uninspected, a joint that's been carrying more weight than it should. A warning sign someone chose not to read. That's true of bridges. It's true of people, too. Looking back now, I can see the cracks, and Kyle had been there for a while. I just didn't want to look at them. That's on me. I kept extending credit, money, patience, the benefit of the doubt, long past the point where the evidence said I should stop. I told myself it was love. And maybe part of it was, but part of it was also something less honest. The belief that if I'd just kept giving, he'd eventually become the person I needed him to be. That's not love. That's avoidance dressed up as generosity. What Amber and Kyle were planning wasn't born in a single conversation. It grew over months. Phone calls to Christine Draper, emails to financial advisors, apartment tours taken the same afternoon I was lying in a hospital bed with cracked ribs. That kind of plan requires sustained intention. It requires someone to look at another person and decide consciously that their life is less important than a line item in a financial projection. I don't say that to be dramatic. I say it because I think most people, when they're in the middle of something like this, want to believe it's a misunderstanding, a lapse in judgment, a one-time thing. They minimize it because the alternative, that someone they love has been calculating against them for over a year, is too painful to fully absorb. I absorbed it, slowly, over 3 days in a hospital room, with Roy's reports coming in and Doug's legal pad filling up, and Sylvia checking my blood pressure with quiet, steady hands. And what I found, on the other side of absorbing it, wasn't rage. It was clarity. That's the part nobody tells you about real betrayal. That if you sit with it long enough without flinching, it eventually stops being about the other person and starts being about you. About what you're going to do next. About who you're going to be when it's over. I chose to do the work quietly, without drama. I moved my assets, updated the documents, made the calls I needed to make. Not out of revenge. I want to be clear about that. But out of the simple recognition that I had allowed a situation to continue far past the point where it served anyone well, including Kyle. Consequences are not cruelty. They are information. They are the only honest feedback some people will ever receive. What I told Kyle in that conference room I meant. The door is open. Not wide, not unconditionally, but open. Because the alternative, closing it entirely, walking away from 36 years of a relationship with my son, is also a choice with weight. I'm not willing to make that choice yet. But I'm also not willing to keep pretending that love without accountability is love at all. Elaine used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they do when things are easy. It's what they do when the structure is under load. I think she was right. I think about Kyle in that conference room, the calculations stopping, the shoulders dropping, the thin, cracked sound of the word sorry. I don't know yet what that moment means, but I know it was real. And real is the only place anything worth keeping ever starts. The compass is back on my bench. Both hinges move freely now.